Hi, everybody. I wanted to just welcome everybody for joining us today for RKD Group's webinar, Don't Cut Direct Mail Acquisition. We did have before just Don't Cut Acquisition, and we wanted to specify a little bit. So today we'll be talking specifically about how we don't want to cut direct mail acquisition. As always, we want your questions and comments, so make sure you use this panel to do so. We'll try and answer them. We'll get them answered by the end, but if we don't, we'll have somebody reach out to you to make sure that you get your questions answered. We have three veterans here with us today. We have Max Bunch, our Executive Vice President of Client Service and Consulting, T. Hill, our Senior Vice President of Analytics, and Ann Wyman, our Vice President of List Services. So we're in great hands today. And I'll kick it off to you, Max.
Thank you, Andrea. Appreciate it. So just a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start out with the impact of cutting acquisition. It's far deeper and longer lasting than many understand, so we hope we can add some color there. We're going to give you some lessons learned from nonprofits who did cut acquisition and just exactly how expensive and far-reaching that is. And lastly, we're going to go through best practices to optimize your acquisition. Now, first, we recognize that you've got a tough decision here, tough times. A lot of people are facing loss of revenue from events that aren't happening. A lot of times people panic. Direct mail acquisition, because it costs money to acquire, sometimes has a target on its back. And you know, we just like you to recognize, and we'll talk about a little later, that is an investment in the future, not something that you just want to cut quickly without counting the cost. We're also talking about ways to invest that event expense into revenue producing direct response. So that's another thing you need to think about. But we also realize that you're facing increased needs for your programs. Everybody's in a critical situation. A lot of people are worried about the upcoming recession and how that's going to affect giving, how that's going to affect their donors, and they can't seem to face the fact that they might be cutting staff and losing volunteers. Gee, they want to cut acquisition before you cut staff or volunteers. Understand all of that. Our point is we obviously realize that this is a tough decision, but our counsel would be let's count all the costs before we make that decision. You don't have to go long. If you look at just recent history, and one of the most famous cases that you can find is American Cancer. And American Cancer, if you just advance the slide, Andrea, American Cancer, you know, the most famous, really the most infamous case of cutting acquisition. They pressed pause on their direct mail acquisition program back in January of 2013. They brought it back 18 months later, so less than 2 years. And in less than 2 years, they lost $29.5 million over the next 5 years. I mean, that class of people that they did not bring in cost them $29.5 million. We're going to show you later on that actually is probably a low figure, because that doesn't count what they lost in mid-major pipeline income later on, doesn't count the planned gifts further on down the line that they missed. So just to sum it all up, I think the next slide is Catherine Holohan says, it's tempting to look at things through a 1-year lens, but the runway for direct mail acquisition is much longer than that. And not only is it longer than a year, it affects other programs downstream. So I think we're going to start off our time with a poll. So Andrea, are you going to kick us off the poll? Yeah.
We have a poll here. So we just kind of wanted to gauge everybody. Has your nonprofit organization had discussions of cutting direct mail acquisition because of COVID? Yes or no? We'll give everybody just a little bit of time. Wow, okay. Interesting. Waiting for it to slow down. Okay, let's close that. And then I'll go ahead and share that with everybody. So it looks like a lot of people said no.
Good news.
Okay, good move. All righty. So let's hide that. And then kicking it to you, T.
Sure, thank you, Andrea. So to start off, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And when you think about the current environment, the pandemic, the economic strife, the civil unrest, this quote is probably going to be the most important thing that I say today, definitely in this presentation. But how do you create the future? How do you prepare and build for your future? You have to really do three things. One, you have to treat data as the treasure and data asset that it is, right? So that requires discipline, data integrity, data governance, all those keywords, business rules, documentation. And then once you go through that laborious exercise, then you have to evaluate the space. Who has the analytic philosophy and the cohesion of services that leads into a growth mindset that drives net revenue, not in the short term, right, but over the long period of time. And then third, you really have to evaluate the environment and really discern for yourself what is your new normal or acceptable rate of return. Some organizations, it's 9 months upon acquisition, 12 months. We just talked to a client just a couple weeks ago about 2 years could be the new runway for them because of the current environment. But there's a lot of good things happening irrespective of all the irregular moment that we're in. Can you go to the next slide, Andrea? So as an analyst, part of my job is trying to understand what's happening now and how will that impact tomorrow. And regardless of what organization you're evaluating, there is a collective consciousness that's being created, right? And the theory behind it is that 25% of donors plan to increase their donations. That's great news. Even amidst this environment of pandemic, environment of economic strife and the unrest, 25% will continue, and 25 will increase, and 54% will maintain. That's great news, right? So what does that mean to us? They're staying the course. And if they're staying the course, that means we must continue to push acquisition out to acquire the appropriate people who are going to pay off for the long term and keep us moving forward. Another good note that I'll make here is a lot of organizations are talking about donor advised funds. Your wealthy class of individuals are looking to where could I reduce my tax liability, right? And also provide charities with the revenue they need to move forward. 33% will ramp up their giving, while 59% will continue to give to the charities that they've been giving to. This is all good signs and good news in the midst of this environment. Can you go to the next slide? And then we look at, so what's going to happen in the future that's going to either positively or negatively impact your organization, our agency, and the landscape. So there really is three options from, again, a collective consciousness. If we start from the bottom and work our way up, number three to me seems to be very less likely, right? It's the virus is going to be contained. Growth is going to return at an accelerated rate, all within this calendar year in Q4, with only having a GDP decline of 2.5%. As an analyst, I don't think that is realistic, given the fact that Texas, Florida, Arizona are already seeing spikes, and certain states are talking about not continuing to reopen. Number two, the virus continues to resurface, but the global economy rebounds. This is highly likely with only a 7.9% GDP decline, which is still large, but you've returned to pre-crisis levels in 2021 of Q4. I also believe that is also less likely. The highest probability is number one, the virus will continue, right? There will be a muted recovery, right? GDP in this year will drop by 8.1%, but your new runway for how long will we be in this environment will end at 2023 Q1. That's when we will return to pre-crisis environment. So what do we have to do? If we believe this to be true, even directionally, right, then we have the next 2 or more years to prepare our organization to generate accelerated levels of revenue once we come out of it. Could you go to the next slide? So this here is talking about what is your pathway to the next normal. And there are a lot of little steps in between to help you get there. And it really begins, as I mentioned before, about analytic services, about data respect, about to help you uncover your normal. And everything has to start with leaning into net revenue. Long-term net. What does long-term net mean? Most people in this space, in my opinion, they think about and they measure LTV at the gross level. That's 99% gross with a sprinkle of net if you're lucky. You know, look for organizations, agencies that think about long-term net. When you acquire a donor in direct mail, over the next few years, how much net will they generate? How do they connect to planned giving, major giving, mid-level giving? What does it mean upon my long-term net impact based upon the initial giving amount? Your ask array and your initial gift amount can make the difference between generating viable levels of net and causing your organization to regress. Age. Does age matter? It does. Whether you are silent majority, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, right? Millennials, by and large, should have similar type of long-term value to your Gen X lower people because of their spending velocity and their cash flow. And if you see a disconnect, that means you're not talking to them in the channels that they deserve or request. Your silent majority, 75+ month people, if that net revenue long-term is lower than baby boomers by a viable margin, that means your direct mail in this particular case does not connect to the major donors, does not connect to the planned givers. And it goes back to messaging, copy, creative, list, seasonality. What time of year do you acquire the best donors that lead to the most net? Location, right? In real estate, location, location, location. Same thing in marketing, right? We know that a certain type of social economic status relative to your geography is positively correlated to long-term net. So link those zip codes with that long-term net and change how you go to market. And then once you really have uncovered the threshold of long-term net that will boost revenue, then you got to evaluate for yourself your primary metrics. Forget how all the other organizations are performing. That's all nice to know, but you need to understand, what does your file, like what's its capability, right? What's my performance floor or ceiling in retention, average gift, in giving frequency? And what are the strategies that I'm executing that are going to push me above the floor or to break that particular performance ceiling? And how does it tie to the people who you are acquiring? Then you go to step 3, that can be done in parallel to step 1, about uncovering or unmasking what we call your core balance index. Who are core donors? Here, these are also multi-year donors. These are people who give for 2 or more consecutive years. In direct mail, they drive 40% of gross revenue and 60% of net if you are an optimized organization that has adhered to step 2 and step 1. Why is that important to understand your core balance index? Core balance index is significantly more important than overall attrition. Overall attrition is a surface level number, right? Because you can easily offset attrition at the active donor level, but core is so much important. 75% of balancing core attrition is in acquisition, 25% in cultivation. So if you don't think about the number of new donors you need to offset core attrition, then you're hurting yourself, because these are the people who upgrade to mid, who upgrade to major, who upgrade to planned giving, highest probability. They're also the donors who safeguard you through an economic downturn, which we're in. So if you want to protect your current state and your future, you have to have the discipline of core balance. And then lastly, step 4, prime leads. I kind of already mentioned mid, major, plan giving. They're all connected, right? And if you don't, in the beginning, understand your long-term net value needs, threshold, discipline, if you don't understand how many years it takes to connect a new donor to a mid or major and what their metrics need to be, and if you're balancing core, then you can never truly unleash the power of how DM connects to the likelihood of converting to a mid, a major, or plan giving. Knowing this and having a cohesive plan that leans into analytics driving net is how you create your pathway to the next normal. And then I kind of already talked about this. This is usually for a wide variety of clients. This is a typical case. We'll see that direct mail has much more power than people give it credit for. This is an organization where I think they have 7 or 8 primary marketing channels, and 37% of their global revenue is driven by direct mail. Now, from those direct mail donors, 50% of people who are considered mid or major donors are originally sourced from direct mail. And 65% of the people who lead plan gifts are the people that were sourced from direct mail. So when you cut acquisition, be careful, because you should expect plan giving to drop, major giving to drop, and you should not be surprised, because these are the hidden heavies that are sourced from direct mail brand new donors.
Okay, before we are going to hop into talking about how to optimize acquisition, we do have another poll we wanted to launch with you guys. So you should see that on your screen. And which of these acquisition factors is the most important? Lists, offer, package, or creative? We'll give everyone a little bit of time. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Close.
I'm going to guess the winner is list. That's what my gut says.
You would be correct. It is list. There were a few that wanted package and offer and creative, but renounding answer for list.
Well, yeah, obviously everybody is on the same page for that. That's good to know. We obviously are strong believers and feel that the most important question you're going to answer as you do direct mail acquisitions, who's going to be receiving this piece of mail? I mean, you can, and we've had experience, and obviously our folks on the webinar have had similar experience. You can send a standard package with average creative to the right list. You can still be successful, but you can send an outstanding offer and great creative to the wrong list and you fail miserably. So the primary strategy here is a list strategy, and we've got Ann Wyman to give you our insider's view of all the important aspects of list and list strategy.
That makes me really happy because I feel like talking about lists is probably everyone's least favorite thing to do, except for maybe a few of us. So I love that you guys, you understand the importance of lists for acquisition, and that's something that, as you know, and worked with RKD, my team is solely focused on who we mail and the list and how we find the best people. And if you've interacted with RKD much in the past, you've heard us talk about list optimization. And so the next slide is just going to walk you through our process of what does that really mean? And it really starts with T, everything that he talked about. It starts with what are the primary metrics that we really need to be focused on, and they're customized to your organization. So it is good to benchmark across different verticals and how you compare to other organizations, but it really is what's your potential and what are the metrics that we want to hit in acquisition that would lead to long-term growth. And then once we know those metrics, we want to go through the very hard discipline of optimizing lists and looking at all the potential lists, the results, figuring out which lists are working best to hit those key metrics for you. We're going to talk about utilizing co-ops, which we have found is a great source to just help enhance those different metrics that we're working. So just move the needle even more. And then really it's the final step is kind of the wash, rinse, repeat, where we're looking at the results after every campaign, re-optimizing, meaning we're going to look for, how did this list perform? What are some changes and fluctuations? How can we readapt for the next acquisition mailing to make it even better? And so we go through this continual process every single time we mail acquisition. It's the discipline of letting the data drive our decisions, and then just the discipline of analyzing that information to let it be our guide on what should we do and what lists work. So I'm going to first just recap what T said in terms of key metrics. So what really are the metrics that determine success? And I think in our industry in past years, we hear a lot of talk about response rates, which are very important. Certainly you want to bring on, the number of donors you're bringing on is very important, but response rates alone can be misleading because as T talked about, we really want to focus on long-term net because those people you acquire in acquisition are going to be your future. And you want to make sure you're investing in acquisition. So it's your money. We know it's an investment. We want to make the most of that investment. We don't want to bring people on that, it's a wasted dollars for them because they're not going to renew on your file. And what we found, and this is just one example of a particular client where we do that long-term net analysis, looking at the first gift at acquisition. What does it look like? What thresholds are they're giving at that first gift correlate to long-term net. And what we see is that for this particular client, donors under $25 did not produce net revenue, did not break even in 5 years, probably even ever. And so what we know from this is that we want to acquire donors for this particular client above $25. So that's a critical metric we need to look at. In addition to response rate is what is the average gift from that list that makes it viable for the future. And so not every client's going to have the same metric as that. You might see some above or below that, but it's something that we're really looking at for our clients to know what is that threshold for your organization. And then we're using that information, basically the LTN, the long-term net. We're looking at that at the list level. So we know our benchmarks for, what are the optimal metrics that we want every list to hit in order to fuel your growth. And then, as I mentioned, we're just going to forecast it's a hard process of forecasting for every campaign and looking at the most recent list results, projecting what we believe how it will perform for that specific campaign. And which of those lists, if you're mailing 500,000 pieces of acquisition, how do we get to that 500,000, making sure all of the lists we're using, the bulk of the quantity is driving your LTN, it's above those thresholds. Look at that at the list level. But we also, as he said, have to take into account there's certain lists that may perform better with certain packages. So we want to factor that into our forecast. And as well, there's variances in seasonality. So sometimes a year you're going to see a higher response rate, a higher average gift. Some packages get a higher average gift than others. So we want to factor that in every time we put together a list plan. We're actually forecasting for that specific package, for that specific season by list, and we can track those trends over time and really be able, when we say optimize, it's really aligning everything so that you get the most out of your investment. And then moving forward, there's questions because what happens is we tend to see that there's a group of lists that work best for your organization. And the question we get asked, often is, are we mailing the same list too many times? Are we mailing the same people too many times? And we do take measures to make sure we're not overextending that. But at the same time, we've done some analysis for other clients. And this is just one example that shows a client that actually mailed 10 times a year. So they mail about every month. And there are certainly people that were mailed out to 9 times, but if you can see in the graph, from the first time to the 9th contact, they had a very similar ROI. In terms of what that's showing us is there may be some fluctuations in how many times you contact people, but there are people that it takes up to that 9th contact, that 9th time that they receive a piece in the mail, that they finally make the decision to give a gift. And that's something that's really critical for us to look at as well, is don't be afraid of frequency of contacting those people multiple times, because some people are going to respond right away, and some people it obviously is going to take it's a longer track for them. This is also why it's important to really consider, if you're cutting back acquisition, which we don't recommend, but not just pulling individual mailings out of the mix, but maybe working with your agency and with us to help to trim back across different mailings, if that were the case, because just pulling a mailing out of sequence really does hurt that frequency as well, and response. And then the final thing I want to talk about is co-ops. You know, a lot of our clients are already in co-ops and participating, and you've seen the outstanding performance. But one thing that we just wanted to focus on is that we really, co-ops are becoming the more and most efficient way to deliver, you know, a high value new donor prospect. And we have done LTN analysis and been able to track, you know, a lot of the list that are the strongest in terms of LTN or co-op models. And so we know that the models are delivering a very high value donor. We can look and see that their renewal rates may be higher, and that their long-term net over time is much stronger. And so we highly encourage our clients to participate in co-ops, but just like our list forecasting and analysis and optimization, it takes work to make the co-ops work for you. So it's not just a one-time, let's set models and then see how they do over time. We are constantly engaging with our partners and our co-op partners to make sure that we're sending new data, refreshing models, building new models, testing new models, and constantly bringing new things to the table. But one thing I want to keep in mind is that co-ops are not just a source for new donors in direct mail. They can also be a great valuable source to help you identify deep lapse donors. The lapse recapture models have been very effective, or even converting warm prospects into donors. So if you've got a large pool of event participants, any other type of non-donors, that warm people on your file that are connected to your organization but they're not donors, co-ops can be a great way to identify who are those people on that file that will be most likely to convert into donors. So we've used them co-ops in different ways, and there's even digital modeling that they offer as well. But we have seen that, you know, the effectiveness of co-ops specifically in driving donor value, but also really helping us to enhance what we're already doing in terms of optimization.
Great. So if we harken back to our hierarchy of factors that we talked about before, you know, the most important obviously was list. But if list is the most important, I would say that the most underrated aspect of acquisition, and clearly the easiest element to mess up, is offer and ask. And so if we take a look at offer first, offer is basically answering the question, what are you asking the donor to do? Said another way, what's the problem you're asking the donor to solve? And we like to say that a good offer is direct, easy to understand. What many people may not know is that offer is going to drive creative and package. You have to have linkage between those two and no disconnect. So clearly, offer is the second most important thing that you're going to be doing in your acquisition hierarchy. And if you look at good offers, succinct offers, $3 provides 10 meals, very direct, easy to understand. And often people get concerned that this is too simple, you know, that this offer really kind of dumbs down the larger issue. And so you might say food insecurity is a complex, multifaceted problem. Meal is only a small part of that solution. But in direct response, the meal is a tangible expression of the solution that the donor is going to grasp and that the donor knows that they can solve. So a mistake like this, like moving from $3 provides 10 meals to $3 helps fight food insecurity, you could see this is what we refer to as offer drift. You could see a suppression as much as 50% of your response just by drifting your offer. So obviously nothing wrong with giving donors more details about food insecurity in newsletters, impact reports, mid-major luncheons, variety of different ways. But as for direct response, we win when we keep it simple. Now, the second half of that offer and ask, I'm gonna let T discuss that, but just spoiler alert, when it comes to money, be careful what you ask for, and T's gonna unpack that.
Yeah, thank you, Max. That's an important statement. When I'm in front of prospects or clients and I'm looking at acquisition, I'm always starting off with be careful what you ask for, because you might or you might get it, right? And it's so true, right? And here is an example of an organization who we found out that for them, the threshold in terms of first gift that led to revenue viability, meaning net, was at $25 or more. Everything in green you see there is their actual overall ask rate options. They had 3 throughout the year, but by and large, these 6 options were repeated with the highest level of frequency. So now, if you know that any acquisition gift above 25 leads to long-term net, but you ask for $15 and $20, which is below that threshold, and then don't have a plan to either upgrade them within a year or either to do what we call catch and release, reduce the contact frequency, then what you're doing is you are asking them to give an amount that you know is going to be a net loser over time. So this is just basic 101 acquisition ask rate fundamentals. Lean into long-term net, understand the threshold, and then begin to test out of the ask rate options that lead you to losing net over time.
That's excellent. I love that, T, because we're just basically listening better to the donor. Now, behind offer and ask, we've got creative, and basically we like to say that you support the offer and get the donor emotionally involved with your creative. And direct response creative is far more about words and pictures than highly designed, colorful layouts. That you usually see that a lot in commercial. In direct response, seriously, a one-word difference can suppress response by 15 to 20%. We've seen this often when testing provides versus helps provide. Now, I mean, again, we test everything. Sometimes this test doesn't bear out, but more times than not, helps provide suppresses versus provide. And when you say provides, it's definitive, it's declarative statement, it connects better, faster, and it seems to prove out time and time again. When you talk also in direct response, photos are extraordinarily important because we like to say they're the window into the soul of the one benefiting from the gift and the window into the soul of the one giving the gift. We're trying to make eye contact between our donor and the recipient. So we test into the right photo. We test photos over and over and over again. And where possible, what we're trying to do is have the reader make eye contact with a child, dog, cat, mother, elderly person in need, cancer patient hoping for a cure. But this eye connection adds emotion and draws the reader into the story. And I love this thing that Carla Baldelli says about donor engagement. Carla is our VP of donor engagement, talking about trying to eliminate the organization, so to speak, and make a direct connection between the donor and the recipient. That direct connection, we believe, increases response, increases average gift. You're saving a life. Well, actually the organization that you're helping the organization save the life, but in the mind of the donor, if they can believe you are saving the life, you've increased the emotion and you increase the response and the involvement. The last element that we talk about is package. And, you know, it's, we like to say it's perfecting the art of getting open. And that's really, quite simply, the package's primary job is to get open. And, you know, we're trying to avoid the trash bin. You know, this is where this is the big threshold for us. And we can get there multiple ways. The package itself can be interesting in look and feel. It can partially tell the story on the outside and what we call teasers and draw the reader in, or I mean, it can show nothing at all. That's what we call a plain white envelope, and that really stimulates curiosity. So we like to say too much information or a hint of commercialization too slick gets you thrown away, and that's kind of our you know, streamlined view of the import of the package. We also know that packages take on the characteristics of their content often. Label package, card package, matching checks, vouchers, tickets, calendars. But, you know, we call them premiums and freemiums, but really they're involvement devices. And we like to focus whenever we can on what we call missionally involvement devices that stimulate engagement. When you stimulate that kind of engagement, the package all of a sudden not only gets opened, but it gets the donor into the offer. And this becomes the completion of the stack, if you will, lists, offer ask, creative, and package.
Okay, so just some key takeaways from today. Direct mail acquisition is necessary for long-term investment. Nonprofits who cut acquisition lose market share and revenue, and apply best practices to optimize your investment. And before we go, I know we're a little over our time here. We did have a question come in that wanted to see if we could get answered really quick. Not sure who wants to take this. Let's see. If we cut back a bit now, can we invest more when the economy improves to make up for it?
I'll take that question. I think you always have, obviously, the right to choose when you want to reduce investments versus when you want to or should increase investments. But know this, acquisition, if it's direct mail or digital, it doesn't matter, right? It is the lifeblood of your organization. And if we remember the importance of core donors, people who give for 2 or more consecutive years, who drive 60% of your net in that channel. Let's not forget how acquisition is connected to mid, to major, and planned giving. At the same time, remember this, it takes 3 years for a new donor to migrate to core. So whenever you cut acquisition, it's a factor of 3x of the time it takes for you to possibly rebuild what you have taken away from yourself. And if you do it for 2 years in a row, it's 6 years to recover. 3 years in a row, it's almost a decade, right? If ever. So cut acquisition at your own peril. I would not be for it. I'm always in the growth mindset.
Of course. We do have one more. I'm going to squeeze one more in here because it's a good one. Would you recommend trying to get people to sign up for monthly giving in direct mail acquisition?
If you don't mind, I'm going to step in.
Sure.
Obviously, we're big fans of monthly giving. Our experience, and while monthly giving is, I mean, in digital, you can make that gift monthly pretty easily. In direct mail acquisition, it's difficult. And we'd recommend trying to get the first gift first, as opposed to the burden of having them consider a monthly gift straight out of acquisition. So try to convert to monthly quickly, whether it's in follow-up packages, thank yous, telemarketing, digital, variety of different things to get that gift to a monthly. But in the first attempt, we wouldn't say go for a monthly gift. We'd say go for a gift.
Awesome. Okay. Just to remind everybody, we do have upcoming webinars on arcadiegroup.com/webinars. Our next one is actually going to be hosted by the Nonprofit Alliance, so make sure you go check that out. That's going to be with Kathy Folks, and the great T. Hill here with us today. That'll be July 9th at 12 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you go check that out. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.